Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 163rd episode of the Truth Island podcast. One of the most aspirational quotes that often comes up when speaking about the human potential for goodness is a quote by Tolstoy. To understand everything is to forgive everything. The implication of this quote suggests that if a man were able to truly understand the motivations and struggles of another person outside themselves, they would be quick to forgive most of the bad things that other people do onto them. For example, if a person could understand the abusive childhood of another, they might be more forgiving and tolerant that someone else has a bit of a drinking problem. In many respects, Tolstoy's worldview is somewhat aligned with Socrates, who believed that all of man's problems could be solved with the replacement of ignorance with wisdom. However, one might argue that just because we understand someone's life circumstance doesn't mean we need to forgive their choices or show compassion towards their way of life. For instance, one cannot downplay the significance that something such as free will plays in our individual choices. Although, from a statistical point of view, children that are abused in childhood are more at risk for becoming abusive adults, not every child that was abused ends up becoming an abusive adult. While no two people are endowed with the same exact life, is it not fair to compare people who come from comparable situations? As much as we sometimes need to look at the uniqueness of individuals and understanding their behaviors and motivations, there is a risk that we will become too keen on finding loopholes which allow us to excuse the inexcusable. Conversely, if we constantly judge everyone the same as everyone else, we risk not seeing some of the distinctive qualities of their particular life. Joining me to help find the right balance between accountability and compassion, I am once again joined by Kenny. Kenny, what do you think of this quote? No two men are exactly the same, but no two men are completely different either.
Well, I think that's a very good quote. I think it's a very good quote, and I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's true. I think it's obviously true. Yes.
I want to kind of continue from where we talked last time. And you had mentioned an example of a gentleman who his son was murdered, and then he instantly forgave the person who did it. Like even before they were sentenced, even before they even spent a day in jail, they just said, "I forgive you." And on first hearing that, it sounded like this man was like the most virtuous man on the world, and like he instantly forgave, and like that's the ideal. Upon further investigation, upon thinking about it, I'm wondering if that was necessarily like the right choice to make. And here's why I'm going to say that. What if the person who murdered the son is not actually remorseful or sorry for what it is that they've done, and this person is kind of offering them a premature forgiveness? I'm kind of concerned now that if we're just offering blanket, forgiveness, we're not actually taking the time to assess if the person who's actually committed the offense is actually sorry.
Okay. Well, I think that's a legitimate caution or thought, against that kind of behavior, and I understand it. I would say that there is a place for that because I absolutely agree with you. What are you forgiving if the person isn't sorry? And there is a place for that. But I think, like I said last week, I think that there is forgiveness is not simply about the other person. It's also about you. It's about you, the state of your heart, the state of your own being. And we'd like to think that we can go on being upset and angry at the person and have it not affect our lives. As much as I'd like to say that's true, I don't think it is. Because humans, if there's anything I know about us, is that we are incredibly emotional and that our emotional states significantly affect our well-being. And so forgiving the person has there are two there's two levels to this. The first level is the letting go of the debt you are owed. That's the forgiveness. You're owed the debt of justice. You're owed the debt of remorse. You're owed the debt of of the apology, and relinquishing that removes that tie you have to the person. It removes that burden, or that chain, if you will. If it doesn't even have to be a chain, because a chain can be a negative connotation, and that's not really what I'm trying to say. But it removes the debt the person owes you, because the debt the person owes you is often a weight on the individual who is owed it. And so, and it's kind of like actual debt. When a person owes you a lot of money, and you say, and you've been waiting for years for this person to pay you back, and let's just say it's not a matter that you could take to court, because if you could take to court, then that's a different story. This is not a matter you can take to court. You can go either there and beat the person up and take whatever you can from the person. Sure, if jungle justice works, it works. But you could also relinquish the debt. You can acquit them of the debt, and that's a peace of mind on your part. Now, that doesn't mean that the money is yours. That doesn't mean that you get anything back. That doesn't mean that doesn't necessarily mean that justice is served. No, it just simply means that there is a peace of mind that comes with not, there's a peace of mind that comes with not holding anything, whether a debt or a negative emotion against the person.
I hear what you're saying. Maybe though, that person, and I agree with you, when you hold that debt, it's mostly a toxic emotion. I fully agree with you on that. But perhaps you actually have an obligation to hold that toxicity within you for the benefit of the person who's committed the offensive action. So let's just say, like, somebody murders my son, and I have resentment towards that murderer, and the toxicity and the resentment is eating me inside. However, if I kind of just release that and forgive that person instantaneously without taking into account whether that person has truly repented or is truly apologetic, I'm giving them a freebie. I'm giving them like a cheap, oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're truly apologetic. I forgive you. That makes me feel good. I feel like a saint, and I feel like the most benevolent angel in the world. And I also get to just prematurely remove that weight on my shoulders. But maybe the morally responsible thing to do is to actually hold that weight on your shoulders and say, you know what? You took away my son who I raised for 20 years. And maybe in 15 years, I will be able to forgive you legitimately. And maybe in 15 years, you'll truly be you'll have atoned for what you've done. If you just forgive somebody instantaneously, that forgiveness lacks authenticity, because it could have been anyone. It could have been anyone who murdered your son. You're just offering a blanket forgiveness without taking into consideration the nature of that person who committed the offense in order for you yourself to feel good. So maybe we have a moral obligation to kind of hold that toxicity within us, even though it might eat us a little bit inside. It's actually more moral to do that so that you can bring justice upon the person who has, created an egregious crime.
Well, yeah, so it depends now. So, for example, all morals are, relative and subjective. It depends on the kind of worldview you hold, because for those who are theists, your morality is no longer becomes subjective. It's now you believe in an objective God who has laid out the world in an objective within an objective moral standard. And now within those standards become subjective. But the very fact that morals do exist is no longer a matter of debate. Then if you're a naturalist, or a person who believes that the world comes from just natural something out of nothing. Is it X? I forget how to say that. But the point is simply that if the world comes from nothing, and there is no standard in the sense of beyond what human beings have created, and then it's still subjective, but it's a collective subjectiveness in the sense of we've all decided that this is the moral standard according to our either society, our traditions, our upbringing, and so forth. So from society all the way down to the family, this is the moral standard. So It depends, because for some, you might say that, yeah, for there are many people out there who would say that it's morally right to hold the person all the way to your own death and to never forgive, because by forgiving, not only are you cheapening the life of your son, but you're actually letting a bad man go free. And for others, they would say, no, it's actually morally right to let go of that, because either their God decrees that they forgive their enemies, or even if you have a religion that is not theistic, like a Buddhist religion that would say to let go of things like that because all attachment is meaningless. So it really does depend on where you stand at the end of the day. And we get into this place where this nuance really does kick in, because we're coming to places where the human being is we're coming to a place where the human being is on an island. And this is why life is so scary, and life is so can be very lonely, because at the end of the day, we all have to pick where we stand. We all have to pick how we're going to live this life. And it has to be our choice. It has to be. And that's why it's so scary, because no two people, hence, no two people are the same. Yet we are all the same. So we're not the same in the sense of our moral views, our traditional backgrounds, our understandings of the world, the way we go about things. We're not at all the same, but we're all the same in the sense that we have the same experience. We experience joy, pain, and sadness. We experience loss and grief, and we experience happiness, and we experience, euphoria, and some weird, very strange metaphysical phenomena that many of us can't explain. So it's being human. But so for a person who believes that holding the murderer accountable, and holding the murderer, by his shorts until the very day of his death, it's understandable. It's simply understandable. And in their mind, if they think, okay, this is the most just thing I can do for the memory of my son. This is the most just thing I could do for society. Then how can I hold that against them? How can I fault them for that? Because it is reasonable. It is an eye for an eye and it's tooth for a tooth. It is the law of the land. So I would say that though I can understand it, I'm coming from a very different point of view, in the sense that for me, I wouldn't be able to hold it against them, and simply because my internal states wouldn't be at peace. I wouldn't be happy doing that, and I wouldn't be happy doing that because of my own understanding of life. I wouldn't be happy doing that because of the way I understand the nature of man, either metaphysical or spiritual and physical. But I could understand why a person would do that.
So I want to think about this from the view of the Abrahamic religions a little bit here. And I think both in Judaism and Christianity, God's capacity for mercy and forgiveness far outweighs his nature for, raining punishment, right? So like in Judaism, we say that God deals mercy with his right hand and justice with his left hand. The right hand being the dominant hand, meaning he's more quick towards mercy and forgiveness than he is with punishment. However, it doesn't say that there is no place for judgment and punishment. I think both religions ultimately, like, there is consequences for not living a morally just life. Like it's not like you don't get like a get out of jail free card for all eternity. Eventually some form of justice does reign upon you. And I want to take an example of, let's go back to the example of the person who's killed someone else's son. Let's say that guy goes to jail, and he goes to jail for 15 years. And after 15 years, let's say his sentence is 25 years, but he goes to jail for the first 15 years. And after the first 15 years, he truly understands what he did was wrong. He truly gets it, that what he's written like countless letters, he's written apology notes, he's raised he's done everything in his power to demonstrate that is truly sorry for what he did. If he goes to the parents and asks for forgiveness and they deny him forgiveness, then I think that the parents are wrong. Like, this person has spent 15 years in jail. They've written countless letters, and they've just demonstrated internally, externally. It's hard to ever know if someone's truly being authentic. But if that person after 15 years says, hey, I know that I have a 25-year sentence and I'm happy to spend the rest of, the next 25 years in jail, but I am truly sorry. If that person refuses to grant mercy or forgiveness on that person, regardless of whether that affects their sentence or not, then I think that that person is holding on to unnecessary baggage and toxicity within them. And I fully concede that. However, we have people in this world, Kenny, who have spent 30 years in jail, and then they get lethal injection, or they get the electric chair, or they continue to kill people while they're already incarcerated. And then they go, they go to get executed, and then the executioner says, do you have any last words? And the guy's like, I don't regret anything I did. I lived life the way I wanted to, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, should I forgive that person? Should I give that person who has been sentenced to lethal injection? Their final words are like, I don't regret any of this. Like, I'm happy with what I did. I lived life the way I felt it. Like, I don't think that we should just give that person, like, forgiveness. Even they're outwardly holding the middle finger in their last seconds of life, telling you that they're happy they took your son's life. I think it's from a morally reasonable place. I don't think that you should forgive that person, because they're not even asking for your forgiveness.
Yeah, but it also begs the question: why is it wrong that the family doesn't forgive the person who is repentant? What does the man's repentance have to do with them? How is it any of their concern how many times the man repents or writes letters? He killed their son. What's their bloody business? If you want to go around shooting guns and you can take a person's life, well, all your repentance isn't going to bring that person back, now is it? So if they don't forgive, I would say that it's equally understandable. Even if the person serves 20, 30, 40, 50 years, life in prison even, and they end up changing their minds and saying they're sorry, why should they forgive? Like, what is the moral obligation to forgive? Who says they have to forgive? If their worldview says, hey, my son, I'm going to hold the memory of my son, and I'm going to honor his memory by never letting go of the fact that this person murdered him, then absolutely, then it no matter how many, how repentant or changed the person is, why should they forgive him? For what reason? You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason to forgive him.
So I think to respond to that, I think that in this world, we always have to search for authenticity in what we're doing. And again, it's hard to prove authenticity. People think that it's a lady crying with tears coming out of her eyes and like, oh, she's truly sad. That's authentic. And there's a lot of actors in this world. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of actors, and there's a lot of phony baloney people who go on Instagram and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Think about the children. I get it. However, I do think it's important to find authenticity in people, and then adjust our actions accordingly. And I think that it takes a lot of work for that family to stay in communication with that prisoner and be like, no, I think that this dude is just trying to get a more lenient sentence. Like, I can see that he hasn't really thought about what it is, because sometimes people apologize because they're just worried about saving their own behind, and they aren't actually sorry for the thing that it is that they've done. They're just trying to get a reduced sentence, or they're just trying to get out of jail as quickly as humanly possible. However, I think that there's something beautiful that happens if that family is assessing periodically, like, okay, you know what, this guy has actually done some soul searching, he's actually done some work, he's actually reflected on a high, profound level what it is that he's done. He's not the same person that he was before. So what you're looking for is, you're looking to see if that person has fundamentally changed who they are and who they are as a person, and then you're giving them forgiveness when they've demonstrated that they are a totally new person, and you're actually helping that person. Because if you just prematurely forgive them and they haven't actually changed into a new, you're actually preventing them from changing into a new person. So let's just say you commit a murder or something and I forgive you 3 days later. I'm denying you the opportunity to actually become a better person because I just cheaply gave you my forgiveness. Whereas if I say to you, my forgiveness is not like impossible. Like I'm not saying that you'll never grant my forgiveness because now you're giving somebody no hope whatsoever. But if there's actually a point where it's like I can legitimately change myself as a character and gain the forgiveness of that person, you're doing that person a favor by actually teaching them how to become a better person. That's like what I'm trying to get out of this, is that like if you are very authentic in the way that you assess mercy and forgiveness, you can actually transform a fiendish person into a good person.
That's the thing. That's the thing. First of all, is that I'm trying to illustrate that there's still no moral obligation on the parents' parts to forgive, because just like the actions of a wicked man do not merit mercy naturally, the actions of a good man does not merit mercy either. And it just doesn't. It's and I'm trying to show that it all comes back to the choice of the parents. It all comes down to, because their actions don't affect you either way. Your son is gone, period. You don't have to forgive him for anything. Anything. He took your son, he took your child, he took whatever. It doesn't even have to be an emotional thing. It's just this person took something they couldn't get back. When a man steals from you, you can say, okay, well, he stole your lawnmower or he stole your PlayStation, so he's going to give you back a PlayStation. He's going to give you the equivalence of the cash, right? How do you equate your son's life? Can he can't just go go to a child factory and absurd idea. Can't go to a child factory and buy you a new son. And so because the actions of this person, whether good or bad, doesn't necessarily merits justice, or sorry, doesn't necessarily merit mercy at all, except for your own choosing. My point is simply that when it comes to justice, I believe that justice and mercy have an equal demand on a situation. As human beings, we're often quick to, we're often quick to pick one over the other, not knowing that we could pick either one. And sometimes, and this is not even because we're talking about on an individual level, we're not talking about state level, because for a state to let a criminal go in spite of the law, that's not, I don't care how merciful the judge is, that's still all kinds of wrong, because there's a written code. This is a written code that governs a nation. This is a written code that governs a society, and you are the mouthpiece of that code. And so this is why the law is very interesting, because it's at once very helpful and at the same time very damning. And so you steal the bread, doesn't matter if you stole it because you were trying to feed your family. You stole the bread, you're going to jail. It's just that simple. Now, but when we're dealing with an individual, when we're dealing on an individual level, we have the same demand. We have the same demand. Justice makes the same demand on us as mercy makes us. Justice and mercy make the equal, and I would say an equal amount of demands on us. So we can, and it all depends on our choice. It all depends on what we choose to pursue. Because beyond that, outside of us, there is no reason. There is no reason to either to forgive anyone or to not forgive anyone. It all depends on who we are and what we choose to do.
Okay, so I think that there's some utility value to society as a whole. And here's why. If there's something I've learned on 163 episodes into Truth Island, is that either extreme is probably the wrong answer. So let's say we have the guy who forgives you 2 days later. I don't think that's right. and the guy who never forgives you is also not right. So I'm just going to take those two individuals and throw them out of my universe right now and say, instant forgiveness, not good, and never forgiveness, not good. The answer is somewhere in the middle. And that's, as human beings, we don't like the median, we don't like the middle, but that's where I find most of my answers to be. Here's the social utility that I see in all of this. I think that mercy, which is cheaply given, is like cheaply disregarded as well. And I think that, and we've been talking about murder, but we can also talk about some less extreme crimes as well. If people do stuff, they're instantly forgiven. Again, I think last week I mentioned the example of the cheating husband. If that mercy and that forgiveness is cheaply given, people are not going to learn, and they're not going to eventually become the highest version of themselves. They just won't, because it's like, oh, I can keep getting away from this. The library near me just passed a new rule where there's no more late fees. And I'm like, what? No more late fees? People are going to be holding on to the same damn book for 2 years. This is going to be an absolute disaster. Same thing with parking tickets. If we're just like, no one ever gets a parking ticket, well, now you're going to get a bunch of people parking in front of fire hydrants and driveways for like 10 years and not moving their car, right? And this is like dysfunctional to society, because it doesn't discipline us and it doesn't actually push us to become better versions of ourselves. So if we're just instantly forgiving people, we're instantly telling people, hey, there's no consequence for your action. Hey, you don't have to pay any late fees. I forgive you, giant bear hug. Like all of this makes for like feel good stories, but it doesn't actually make people better versions of ourselves. So I think there's a social utility in not denying forgiveness forever, but kind of making it a little harder and something that you have to earn. I think human beings function at our best when we have to earn something. So if forgiveness is like not completely off the table, but something that we can eventually build our way up to, that actually creates the best version of humanity.
So it's one of those, interesting things about us. Yes, we can't, if you look at humans as wonderful as we are, as advanced, as brilliant, and incredibly innovative as we are, we still need whips to get things done. We have to get tickets by the police to not speed, which I think I got one a couple months ago. So yeah. Yeah. Well done, Kenny. So the point is simply, yeah, we have to have these whips. We have to have these chains, these social conditioning. We're like, monkeys in a test room. We have to get either the taser or the candy, punishments and rewards to function as a society. Now, here's the thing about, and I do agree with you. I do believe that when you say mercy cheaply given, I don't necessarily know exactly what you have in mind when you say that, but I do agree with you that mercy cheaply given is something. It's not ideal. I wouldn't say it's wrong, but I would say it's not ideal, because here's when we say cheaply given, I need to understand exactly what you mean. So, for example, the idea that always told people that as my son grows up, I'm going to teach him, before I teach him how to restrain himself from fighting, I'm going to teach him how to fight. I'm going to teach him how to beat the crap out of someone. I'm going to teach him to do that so that he can do it. He can do it if he wants to do it. Then I'm going to teach him how to restrain himself, because if he restrains himself without knowing how to fight, he's just a wuss. But if he knows how to fight and he knows he can take down the biggest, baddest guy on the playground, but he doesn't do it, he doesn't need to do it, then he's a restrained young man. And I think it just comes to mind, Jordan Peterson talks about something like this. He talks about how men need to be monsters. And if, before some about, I forget, but some about being a monster, but being, in control of that monster's tenacity. So I kind of see it as the same idea here, in the sense of, if you're cheaply giving out mercy, in the sense of you have you have no idea of what right and wrong is, no sense of justice, no sense of social or cosmic responsibility, then your mercy really isn't mercy. You're just, how do I say this? You're farting in the wind. You're not really, because it's not coming from any substance. Because mercy is mercy because of justice. Because of justice. Because one understands the punishment needed. One understands what is due you. That's why it's a debt. You owe, you understand it. This is a payment that somebody needs to give you, or you need to give out. It's a debt, right? And so if you don't know that you're owed something, how can you really forgive? You understand what I'm trying to say? If you don't really know it, then you're not really forgiving. You can't acquit a debt you don't know exists. You're just loose with your money, and you're basically a fool with your money. And so what happens is, when it comes to a person who deals it out willy-nilly, I'm thinking of a person who has no construct whatsoever of what justice is and what mercy, and consequently, if you don't know what justice is, you really can't know what mercy is.
So I'm going to define cheaply given mercy here. So I think that before you forgive somebody, you need to adequately look at the other person and be like, well, first off, have they asked for my forgiveness? Like sometimes people forgive other people. They haven't even asked for forgiveness, right? Like they just are like, I forgive you. It's like, wait a minute, that person didn't even say they were sorry and you're already forgiving them. So you have to like assess whether that person has sought out your forgiveness. Have they atoned? Have they tried to compensate you for any damage that they've done? So if some dude like destroys your car, let's say he takes a baseball bat and destroys your car, it's like, are you just forgiving them for the sake of forgiving them? Or did that person come to you a year later and give you $5,000 and say, listen, man, I really lost my cool that day. That was inappropriate. I've put aside a few dollars every paycheck, and now here's some money. I want to make this up to you. I want to pay for the damages that I did for your car. So in order to kind of dish out that forgiveness, you're assessing what the behavior and the actions of that other person and actually treating them as such. We're actually approaching Halloween, and I think an example of this is sometimes there's like lazy people who put candy out in front of their door. Like they don't actually open their door. They just leave a bunch of candy out there. And sometimes some rotten kid will come and just pour all the candy into their bag and leave nothing for anyone else. Like that person is not, that person is not like adequately thinking about the nature of others, right? They're like, oh, like I'm just giving candy out. I'm sure all of these kids are well behaved and they'll just take one or two pieces and just altruistically leave candy for others, whereas that's never the case. There's always some kid that comes along and just steals it for everyone else. So when you're dishing out mercy and punishment and rewards, you need to be adequately paying attention to the actions and behaviors of that other person. And that's what I mean by cheaply given mercy, is that like if that person who took a baseball bat and destroyed your car, if you're just instantly forgiving them with them not raising any money to pay for your damaged vehicle or taking any kind of steps in compensating you for the harm that they caused, then that's cheaply given mercy. Whereas adequately and rightful mercy is when some time has gone by and they've actually demonstrated with actionable steps, like they've tried to make it up for you. Now, obviously in the loss of a life, there's really no way you can make that up. So that's a much more difficult barrier to transcend. But I think for a lot of transgressions that go on in this world, there's always something that you can do to kind of make up for that loss.
Yeah, I can see, excuse me. Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think that, the person absolutely has to have a sense of justice. They have to know, and you're right when you say, I like when you said, they have to look at the other person and adequately assess who they're dealing with, because it's just the way life works. Now, where you and I will, part ways is that the person has to apologize. And I do believe that the person apologizing is incredibly important, but I don't think it has to happen. I think that a person can absolutely let go of a person's debt before the person comes to ask for forgiveness or even comes to pay that debt. And just like I said, it's simply for the individual's own sake, not for the other person's sake. But that's, I can understand, that's a very individual thing, and it's not. I would say that it's not incumbent on anybody else to do so.
As far as the apology thing that goes on there, I think again, it depends on the infraction that's occurring, right? And are they, for me, sometimes apologies can also be very phony. So it's the apology, and then it's also the subsequent behavior and actions that are occurring thereafter. Because anyone could just say, "I'm sorry," especially teenagers. Teenagers are really good at the "I'm sorry," right? So that's not the only criteria that I look for. I look for what I'm really examining behind the "I'm sorry" is the subsequent behaviors and actions thereafter. Okay, that's what
a lot of hard work, mate.
It's hard work, but maintaining a civilized society is hard work. Like, if you want the world to be better and you want people to behave and be civil to one another, it requires you to keep tabs on people, and it requires you to like.
Oh my, that sounds very nice. Oh my God. What is this, 1984? That sounds very 1984. But here's the thing. I do believe that there are people who are paid to do that. The police is paid to do that. Detectives, the FBI, whatever. Yeah, and then judges, lawyers, they're absolutely paid to do that. So make sure that not only are you keeping the law, but you're serving your due rights, or your just dishing out your just desserts, right? And but I think that for us human beings, keeping tabs on our fellow human beings, especially our equals, is a very tedious and troubling task.
Okay, let me clean that up.
That's what we call Karens, right?
But let me clean that up a little bit. I only think that you need to keep tabs of somebody if you're bringing them back into your life. So if you've decided like this person is a repeat offender and they're not getting any better, I don't think that you should stalk them on social media or Facebook and be Big Brother. I think you should just make this decision of like, it looks like this person is not learning from their ways. They're not getting any better. They're not improving. They're not sorry. I'm not going to keep tabs on them for the next 30 years, but I'm going to cut them loose. I'm going to let them go. I'm not, and again, like I think of a woman and a cheating husband. That woman is not being Big Brother and stalking her, ex-husband for all eternity, waiting for him to redeem himself. She's just making that decision of like, it doesn't look like this guy is improving. I'm cutting him loose. So that's kind of my solution to this, is like, you're keeping tabs on that person if you've decided to incorporate them back into your life, whether they're an employee, whether they're a significant romantic other, friend, whatever. That's the only times you're keeping tabs on them and kind of monitoring their behavior a little bit more. But I ideally, if you see that there's no improvement in the situation, I think the better solution is just to be like, hey man, it looks like we're going different directions, best of luck, and then that's it. I don't think you should I want to be clear on that. You're not stalking them forever.
What's that old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me a third time, I push you down a bridge. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And that's a very human thing to do. That's what we do as humans. So we certainly don't, I wouldn't really in any way encourage anybody to stay with a person or in a place or relationship that's a very troubling one, that the person keeps attacking, destroying, or being malicious, or something is just breaking the laws of the contract, right? The relational contract. And so yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That makes good sense.
The reason I bring this up is that I think that society has a nasty pattern of swinging too much in either direction. We've definitely been where we're like ultra draconian, like medieval torture, like, you sneeze the wrong way and therefore we're throwing you in a gulag for 30 years. Like we've definitely swung in that direction. I think that we can also be guilty of swinging too much in the other, like loosey goosey kind of direction. And I think from the deepest moral level is that when we swing too much in that other direction, we kind of legitimize bad behavior and just pure evilness. Like we're allowing evilness to just roam free and just we're tolerant and accepting of it. And that is also extremely dangerous. I think that evil that's not properly dealt with becomes normalized, and that's a very dangerous world to live in.
So yeah, it's not necessarily that it makes all evil permissible, but and so it depends on if you go about this thing the right way or the wrong way. But then again, we've already established the definition of what it means to forgive too easily. And this is and you would let me know if I'm, misunderstanding, but you would say there's a person who really has not looked at what he or she is actually confronted by, and doesn't really understand the demands of justice in the situation. And then I would say that that's not really forgiveness. But then in that case, it does create a meandering and placid, not it was what I'm looking at, it creates a very lazy kind of human and society, which often becomes very, filled with all kinds of dark and unwanted things.
I like that you use the word lazy, because I feel like, I'm going to be very honest, as human beings, whatever we're not punished for or there's no consequences for has a way of becoming permissible. That's who we are as a species. Like, we like to think that we're operating at this highly morally elevated state. And some of us, even if we're legally able to do something, we don't do it, but that's few and far between. Most corporations, most people are like, can I get away with it? Am I going to get caught? Am I going to get away with it? Can I get caught? That's just how people function, my friend. Like most people just are wondering, what is the consequences? How long am I going to go to jail? Is anyone going to find out? Is there a loophole? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The role that I see punishment in the society is that the person is punished, and at first they're just lamenting themselves. They're feeling sorry for themselves, and they're in a state of pity. Eventually, that suffering should awaken a moment in their lives where they transform fundamentally and say, okay, I'm no longer feeling sorry for myself. I'm no longer feeling sorry for the fact that I'm here in prison for 20 years because I killed somebody, or I did something bad, or I did something egregious. If we remove that punitive element and we just instantly give people compassion and forgiveness, my fear is that it's going to stifle all growth, and evil behavior is going to become normative just by virtue of the fact that it's not being called out and there's no consequences, because we're denying that person the growth. We're denying them consequence. And when we inflict consequence on somebody, we're not doing it just because we want to watch them suffer. We're doing it so that they can arrive at a state where they will be able to reach growth and then repent meaningfully for what it is that they've done. And that's the fear I have, is that if everyone became like that gentleman that you described in the very beginning, that just forgave killers and so forth, we're going to have a society where a lot of bad behavior is just becoming normal.
Well, the gentleman that I spoke of I believe was a very intelligent human being, and I don't think he was the kind of person that we're talking about here. I think that what he was doing was something based on his, like I said, he was a Muslim, and basically on his own understanding of his religion, he did it from the genuine stance of his own understanding, and I would say it was sincere, and I believe it was because it's his son. Nobody loves his son more than he loves his son, so he has to know what he's doing. So, and I would say that, okay, well, I think what that gentleman did is perfectly fine. Yes, it shouldn't always be the case, fine, but I don't think it's up to me personally to determine. That's why I'm not a judge, and I believe that being a judge is one of the hardest jobs in this world. is, one of the hardest things is finding out, okay, where should mercy be, and where should it be punishment? Because punishments, you were speaking about how mercy can let people run rampant. Well, punishment does the same thing. We send people to jail all the time. They come out and commit more crimes. It doesn't really change anybody. So just like punishment can change some, and it doesn't for others, mercy can change some. We read in Crime and Punishments, the young man who had murdered the money changer, the lender, money lender, really didn't give a crack. I mean, his psychology was being torn down because of the gravity of his guilt and the crime, but it was his friendship with that young lady that really began to melt his heart. It was her mercy towards him that made him realize that there was something incredibly wrong with him. So mercy changes people just like punishments changes people. It depends on the people we're dealing with, and it depends on the circumstances and situation. That's why I say that in every situation, justice and mercy have an equal demand on the situation. It's just now the wise person who can understand how to go about it, and and when to go about it.
Okay, I actually love what you're saying, and I think that the strongest form of mercy is when you offer mercy, even though you have the capacity to inflict punishment. And I think you were, kind of alluding to this with training your son in martial arts and teaching them, okay, you have the power to now inflict punishment. However, your first priority is to inflict mercy. And here's the thing about this, though. I think that mercy is most effective when it's earned, when there's some kind, when it has to be earned in some way. Because if you're just forgiving people, in a very merciful manner, and it comes easily, you don't have that period of reflection. You don't have that period of reflection. Like, in Dostoevsky's novel, Crime and Punishment, the character is suffering tremendously. He's suffering tremendously, and he feels guilty. Not everyone is like that. Like, that guy already had like a moral backbone to him that made him suffer and made him feel bad about his crime. There are some people out there in this world that if they're not caught, if they're not put in handcuffs, if no consequence befalls them, they just keep on killing and doing whatever it is that they want to do. It's only when somebody catches them, there's a punishment inflicted, and then maybe at some point somebody comes along and speaks to them in a gentle tone or something like that. Like I've noticed with like students, for example, they'll take for granted the teachers in their lives that care about them. They just will, because there's so many adults that are like, hey buddy, let's turn it around. And there's so many adults that are just like bending over backwards to keep these kids happy, that they just take for granted all of these people. However, once they've suffered a bit and they realize, oh my goodness, this world is a cruel, bad place, then they come to appreciate those kind figures in their life. So that's why I say you need to have the punishment element first in place. That person then needs to suffer, and it's quite arbitrary. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 8 years. It depends on the individual. But I think that the mercy is the most effective when it's like you're basically leading the person has spent 10 years in jail, they're being led to the gallows, and all of a sudden they get that call from the governor saying, all right, I'm commuting your sentence down. And that guy's on their hands and knees saying, oh, thank goodness. But if they're arrested and they spend like 2 months in jail, and then the governor calls and says, yeah, you're free to go, where's the reflection? Where is the gratitude? Where is the, like changing your life around moment? Because if it happens too quickly, you deny that space for that kind of inner transformation to happen.
Well, that's usually the case, but that's not always the case. I mean, I believe that people can have, because they know that they don't deserve it, even if they don't have time to reflect. They know they know in the moment what they've done, and they know the law. And getting the opposite of what they expect can be a very life-changing situation. Another illustration, I'm sorry to keep bringing up these books, but and I know that literature isn't always a perfect representation of the world, but sometimes it does get close enough. So in Jean Valjean's situation, where he steals from the minister, from the priest, and he's caught and brought back, and the priest tells him, hey, I gave these to him And oh, by the way, you forgot these ones, and he gives him even more of the things he had stolen. Now, someone like Jacques, it wasn't in is it Jacques? The
Javert.
Javert, thank you. Someone like Javert would look at that and say the priest is completely out of his mind. But that situation was it was a paramount situation in Jean Valjean's life. There was no time to reflect. He stole it. He meant to do the man a great deal of, well, harm. He stole from him. And he was immediately not just forgiven, but given more than he had stolen. And this changed this man's trajectory. He changed his life completely. I'm saying that there are still individuals where people will take advantage of your mercy, absolutely. Just like people will take advantage of your penalizing system, absolutely. It's not a zero-sum case. It's a because we're so different and so the same. That difference is really where we have this. That's why we have wars. That's why we have arguments. That's why we, murder our brothers and our sisters. That's why that's why there's a need for justice and mercy, because of that difference. So I believe that justice is incredibly important. I do believe that. And I do believe that, but I also believe that mercy is equally important. And I believe that both of them have the capacity to accomplish the same thing. And but in our world, we lean quickly towards judgments, very quickly towards judgments and punishments. And that's fine, because that's just the way it is. But if you look at the way our prison systems work, it doesn't seem to be accomplishing much. One man describes prison. I remember I was watching an interview the other day by a criminal. He said that prison is a university for crime, university of crime. You go in there not knowing much, come out knowing a whole lot more than you did before you went in. You were stealing bread before you went in. You come out, you're stealing the whole damn factory. So so I think there's a place for both, and I think it takes a little bit of wisdom to navigate and to know who you're dealing with. Because just because somebody doesn't look repentant on the outside, or doesn't even know they're starting to consider one thing or the other. My point is simply that the human heart is very interesting, and it responds to things sometimes almost like it has a mind of its own. It responds to things in ways that we would never really expect ourselves to respond.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I think in the case of Jean Valjean, the priest in that situation was looking at that man and saying, "Oh my goodness, this man is destitute. He's hungry. I understand why he's stealing this food. I understand why he's doing that." And I think the priest made the right call and used his discretion to offer mercy and forgiveness, and rightfully so. However, I'm wondering if, let's say Jean Valjean did not steal bread to feed himself. Let's say he just decided to burn the priest's home down. He just decided, "I'm burning your house down because I feel like it." And then that priest just said, "All is forgiven, my son, no worries at all." This is where circumstance and the factors surrounding the crime actually matter. So I think with our criminal justice system, if the person has committed a crime and there's circumstances that force them to do that crime, like feed their family, there's no jobs available and so forth. I'm not saying that person should be completely absolved and have no punishment, but those are the kind of factors and variables that you're considering when rendering punishment or forgiveness. Like, okay, this person was like pushed into a very awkward corner. Same thing with like self-defense crimes. If someone is like, well, that guy would have killed him the following day if he had not acted first. All of those things, come on the table, and we obviously consider them. However, there are moments maybe where instantaneous mercy and forgiveness comes into play. But there is like a number of criminals where it's like they clearly at that moment just aren't feeling sorry, and there's no special set of circumstances that excuses why they committed that crime. And therefore, like, a more instantaneous punishment might be the rightful answer. That's not to say that forgiveness is completely off the table. However, instant forgiveness is completely off the table because there's no special circumstances. There wasn't a good reason why the crime was committed, and the person doesn't feel all that remorseful that they've been caught.
Yeah, but then it still comes down to the fact, to the question of, is it, it's not, it's not even a question. The idea that it's not, that forgiveness is not simply about the person you're forgiving. It's also about your own emotional state. It's also about your own life, the kind of person you want to be, and so forth. There are factors that play into an instantaneous forgiveness of a person. Now, when we're talking about this, we need to differentiate between a state's responsibility towards crime and an individual's responsibility towards crime. An individual has his own choice. He can forgive or not forgive, whatever he wants to, because it's his choice as an individual. But when it comes to a state, I don't know that a state really has much of a choice. I mean, sure, judges can make leniencies where they allow. But that's up to them. As a representative of the state, they have that power. But usually the state does crack down on you. It doesn't matter if the individual forgives you, you're still going to jail for 20 years. It's just that simple. So the crime is usually paid for. But that's the question, is going to prison, is that what justice is? Is serving 20 years and coming out of that situation an even harder criminal? Is that justice? Is that, I mean, it seems like justice, but it seems like an incomplete and flawed justice. But it's the one we've got for the most part. But I would say that the state has no need and no obligation to have mercy or to forgive anybody for anything they've done. But if an individual decides to do so, I can see why it would be not only reasonable, but even, but encouraged. Go on, please.
Yeah, no, I'm not. First off, I'm not going to even try and defend our prison system. I know that it does a very poor job on rehabbing people, and you're absolutely correct that people go in for minor offenses and then come back committing major offenses. Now, I do want to talk about, though, the individual agency and forgiveness. Okay, and I'm just going to use myself, and I'm going to be honest with you, man. I think that you dance with the angels a bit more than I do. I'm kind of in the dark shadows a little bit more. And I want to use the example of the baseball bat in the car that I talked about earlier. Some guy comes, they lose their patience, they take a baseball bat and destroy your car. If that happened to me, if some dude came with a baseball bat and destroyed my car, and a year or two went by and that person knocked on my door and presented me with like maybe double what the car was worth and said, "I'm so sorry. That was a mistake. I lost my temper. I've saved diligently. This should more than cover the cost of the car that I destroyed." If I just slammed the door on that guy's face, I would feel upset inside. I'd be like, "Aaron, you're being ridiculous now. This person's on their hands and knees groveling. They've saved up, double the cost of the car that they destroyed. You're being a stickler right now. You're being a stickler, and then that toxicity will probably live inside of me. However, if a guy comes and destroys my car and is like, "What of it, man? Yeah, bro, I just destroyed your car. Deal with it." If that happened to me and I instantly forgave them, I would actually feel like a fool, and I would start hating myself, and I would actually have a certain level of toxicness within myself for being like too foolish or too easygoing or too forgiving. It actually would bother me. It would actually bother me if I just let someone get away with something and they never there were no consequences for their behavior, and they never had to reflect and then have that moment where they come back to me and we make it right. So,
Yeah.
And maybe this is just because I'm a more darker individual and I just think in terms of that. But like, I actually think that if I forgive too easily, I would also harbor toxic feelings about, you know what the word I'm looking for is? I would harbor resentment for the person that destroyed my car, because I'll be like, this guy destroyed my car. He has never apologized. He's not made any restitution for the fact that he destroyed my car. And I just heard that last week he destroyed someone else's car. So
Yeah.
like that's going to create resentment and anger on my part by forgiving them too easily.
That makes sense. And here's the thing, and that makes good sense. That's why this is not a forceful thing. This is not something you shove down people's throats. because it's at the end of the day, it's better to be honest than to pretend to be something you're not. If you do forgive and it's not natural to you, you will resent. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. Absolutely, yes, because it's a judgment on you for being a fool. If you don't, it's understanding that changes everything. Understanding new information changes everything. What you described, my friend will say this is not one for one, but listen, what you described is uh, is similar to this. The man who, there's a guy who he lends out money, right? He lends out money. This is what he does, right? And one day he's walking down, he sees this guy's so he's very financial apt guy, right? He sees a homeless man or someone who is down in his luck, and the guy comes and wants to borrow money, or even just ask him to if he can have the money. And he thinks that if he takes that money out of his pocket and gives it to the guy, he's a sucker. He's a sucker, and so he doesn't do it. Now that's understandable, because here's the thing: there's a sucker-like aspect to it. What you're doing is, what's happening is, first of all, you're a guy who understands how money works. People work hard, they make money. You give money, hoping to to get it back in return. Money is a game. It's a business. His money for him is a big game. It's a business, right? It's something he takes very seriously. Like most of us, we take our money very seriously. You can touch. You can touch or take my life. Take my wife, take my kids, take my dog, but don't you dare touch my wallet. It's like the money of your life.
That sounds like an ad for a credit card company or something.
So we really take our money very seriously. And this guy too. And so he feels like a sucker when he has to give money to anybody who is not in his mind, as he understands the world to be, living adequately or up to the task of being worthy of that money. And that's understandable. So anybody who is not worthy of your forgiveness, why should you give it to them? Well, it's not a matter of, and I would never encourage anybody to do that. I think it's a complete waste of time. But I do believe that there are those. I'm not saying I'm one of them. You misunderstand me. I'm speaking only ideologically here. I'm not saying that this is how I live my life. Now, this is how I'd like to live my life. But I tragically know, if you cross me, I'm going to push you down a flight of stairs. I'm just kidding. But the point is simply that,
you're preaching, but you're not walking.
Oh yes, crooked as you are like us, are you not? So it's the point is simply that this is still natural for many people. It is natural for them. There are people who can give that money and not feel like suckers. They just want to help. They don't really care about the money. They don't think twice about it. It's more about the individual, because there's something has changed in their understanding. They're not seeing it as giving of the money. They're seeing it as helping a person. A comedian once said, it was a simple change in his thoughts that helped him realize, helped his comedic life, right? He said he goes on stage to get laughs from people. And every time he didn't get laughs, he would come out feeling bad. He just felt off. He just felt awful. It felt like he wasn't a good comedian. But something clicked in his mind one day in a moment. He says, instead of thinking about getting laughs, why don't you think about giving laughs? Giving them an opportunity to laugh, And so that changed the game for him big time. The same guy doing the same thing, but different mind, different understanding. So I think that, the people who are like this, who can give that mercy, like the man who was our very first and early example of the Muslim man who had forgiven that murderer of his son, he's seen something different. His understanding is clicking on the points that, for many of us, it's just not clicking naturally, And so I would say, for you or anyone else who is not, it doesn't come naturally to you. Oh yeah, it doesn't come naturally. Why pretend? Why try to be something you're not? But if it does come naturally, then please, by all means, go about it. Go about it as you can.
Okay. The thing about it, though, is that we have to, so there's my way of doing it, where so let's say we have the gentleman who instantly forgives murderers, arson, whatever it is. And then you got guys like me who are like, I'll forgive you, but you have to jump through some hoops in order to get there. Mm-hmm. I don't want to live in a world where I'm imperfect and the guy who instantly forgives is the ideal that we're all striving for, because we could make this mistake of putting instant forgiveness dude on the highest pedestal and being like, oh, well, we should all aspire to be that, where it's like, maybe you kind of want to be more like a King Solomon, and you're sort of, making wise decisions. Some of them are a little harsh, some of them are a little bit on the softer side. That's just where my mind is thinking. I don't know if reaching that guy's level is necessarily the final destination for all of us. It may not be the wise destination for all of us. What I think is, I think what we should be teaching is maybe something called wise forgiveness, where we're teaching people that if you harbor resentment and you harbor ill feelings towards people for the rest of your life, without warrant, it's going to eat you up inside. I think that's a part of wise forgiveness. But I think wise forgiveness also teaches people that there are dangers of forgiving people, too easily. That there's a tale in Aesop fables where a wolf is allowed to like play with the sheep for a while, and the farmer sees this, and he's watching the wolf, and he says, well, this is a different wolf. This is a special wolf. This is a good wolf. This wolf is not going to harm the sheep. One day the farmer decides to like disappear for a day. Lo and behold, the farmer comes back. All of the sheep are gone, right? The wolf just went wild and crazy. And innocent people can suffer if you don't pass judgment, because there are consequences. If I just instantaneously forgive the arsonist, well, then that arsonist is going to then light other people's house on fire or destroy other people's cars. The same thing with the wolf. If you're not bringing that wolf to some justice, you open up the door for them to continually do those things. I know you're going to say that the criminal justice system and individual, forgiveness are two separate entities, and I hear you. I hear you on that, but you have to also think about this on like let's say somebody commits an infraction against you that doesn't warrant the criminal justice system. Okay, cheating, like if you're in a relationship and someone cheats on you, that doesn't necessarily warrant the criminal justice system. You have to be wise in how you dish out your forgiveness, because if you have a cheating spouse and you instantaneously forgive them, well, now you've invited them to continually do that to you. So even, we can't fully there are instances where people are committing infractions against you that don't involve the criminal justice system, but you yourself have to establish appropriate boundaries.
Well, yes. I mean, sure. We're talking about, well, first of all, those situations are far fewer and in between. But for example, the person who is married to a cheating spouse, something like that, and I know it's a hard situation to be in. So the best thing to do is to make sure you don't forgive them. Make sure you don't forgive them. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that you make their life a living hell, and pour heaps and heaps of guilt. Maybe tell all your family what they did. Maybe put it on social media. Make sure they feel horrible. Get them to a point of suicidal, maybe to a point of near suicidal tendencies. And then if they feel bad enough, they can come crawling back to you, and then you can forgive them. So my point is simply, it's the alternative is equally dangerous. My point is simply that in those kinds of situations where we have the laws in our hands, where it's not the police that's involved, it's not the judges that are involved, we have to be incredibly careful, because just like mercy can be harmful, I say people can take advantage of us, and we can be harmed by being merciful to people. I understand that. We can do an incredible amount of harm to others by doing the exact opposite, an incredible amount of harm. There are people who we have guilted to the point where they have killed themselves. And when is enough? When is enough? You know what I mean? So the point is simply that I'm not saying that justice is unimportant. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that people shouldn't take responsibility for their actions. I think they should. I'm saying that mercy is very important as well. I think it has an equal demand on us as justice has on us.
You actually touched upon something that Aristotle said, and he said that the punishment cannot exceed the original transgression. And that's one of the best quotes from Aristotle ever. So in the case of the cheating husband, for example, if the wife does all the crazy stuff, sullies his name on social media and broadcasts, my husband's a cheater and so forth, I would argue that the punishment is exceeding the original transgression, because now the man's complete reputation has been sullied and she's gone absolutely crazy. But there still needs to be some consequence for that behavior. It's important that the punishment does not exceed the original transgression, but she needs to be like, I would like to be separated from you for 6 months, or I think we should just, I think you should move out right now, or like, I don't want to see you again for a year. Like, there has to be something. I'm not saying it's to the point of,
that's perfectly reasonable. That's
yeah,
perfectly reasonable response to that. And and especially based on their marriage contract. It says, right, there's a marriage contract we all get into. Some of us have a different one. Some of us sign prenups. Some of us, based on our cultures and religions and so forth, there are certain things that need to take place. So it's not really up to the individual. At the end of the day, there are contracts, and there are certain expectations to be met, and natural, if not written, obligations or punishments to be dealt out if the person doesn't. I'm saying when it's up to the individual, because that in that situation, it's not necessarily up to the individual in the total sense, because you've cheated. There is the marital contract of till is it sickness or in health, and promise. I forget how these things go, but promise to be loyal and faithful to her and blah blah blah. So yeah, that's a perfect separation, and is a perfectly reasonable and understandable repercussion for that kind of behavior. And yeah, it's I don't see. Yeah, so it's a perfectly reasonable repercussion for that behavior, just like being merciful and forgiving that person is also a perfectly reasonable deal outs for that situation. Because, like I said, they both have an equal demand. It all depends on the individual and how they see things. Both can do harm, but both can do incredible good. And I don't know, and no one. So for me personally, I absolutely do believe that the person who forgives is how you say, is the attainable, is the ideal. And that's not to say that I'm going to force that to anybody else. Everybody should have their own, how you say, specific desires and how they want to live their life, and who they aspire to be in their 60s, 50s, and 70s, and so forth, and have the ideal mind or person they'd like to be like. For me, that is the case. But to say that it is the case for everybody and it should be the case for everybody is absolutely no, not at all. There are people who are simply they're just minded, and that's what we want. Those kinds of people to be our judges, and we want those kind of people to be our lawyers and our police officers. Because where you show mercy where mercy is not due, what you've done, you yourself have become a criminal. There's a situation where the police officer warned a criminal that that he shouldn't do such and such a thing, lest he gets, like he goes to jail. This is a guy, and now he's being, now he himself may be going to jail for that, because he chose to be merciful where mercy was not in any way required, and because of that he perverted the law. So the mercy is not necessarily the end all be all, because there is, like I said, it's an equal. It's a fine line and a fine dance that we have to learn how to do. So yeah.
No, it's interesting, and I think this is going to be one of those episodes where we agree to disagree, and I think that's okay. I think that your ideal man is the person that can distribute mercy, like on an unconditional level, or maybe not. Maybe I've got that wrong, or they can aspire to tell me what your ideal man is in regards to mercy. Then I don't want to falsely paraphrase you.
I don't know that I can. It's not like I said, to me, I don't see it like, it's not like a specific, it's just a person who has the understanding to put where mercy is needed, and to put justice where justice is needed.
Okay.
And who has no qualms whatsoever, because for many, mercy seems weak and obsolete. But I don't want to think that way. I believe that both, like I said, are not, one is not greater than the other. But I do believe that the mind that can apply mercy powerfully is absolutely paramount. But I do believe that and that's simply because we're living in a world that doesn't even prefer it, honestly, but it prefers it strangely and kind of in like a very selfish way. Justice. We are all about justice until it's about us. And then when it's about us, we really, 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 really want mercy. And so it's knowing that both of them have their place and both of them have an equal demand on every individual, and that each individual must choose what he or she is going to deal out in that situation and live with that.
You might find me a little bit of a sadomasochist here, but sometimes I like when my girlfriend calls me out on my BS. like you said that every individual like craves mercy, and maybe when I was younger I just wanted to get away with stuff. As I get older, I kind of respect people who call me out on my nonsense and say, no, you messed up, Aaron. And I actually like those people who bring justice to my table and point out when I've done wrong, because I then have the opportunity to improve. So
That's good. That's good now,
because people
because, yeah.
people who are just like instantaneously forgiving me and just tolerating the crappiest version of Aaron, well, that doesn't allow Aaron to actually become a better Aaron. So in my ideal world, I think that the perfect individual knows, just exacts like the perfect dosage of punishment, perfect dosage of mercy, and it's all perfectly timed out, that to me is my ideal version of a man, is that he has perfect mercy, perfect punishment, and it happens in the exact timeline as it should. That creates the most character and the highest moral level. And it's very complicated, and it's different for every individual, and it's different based on every circumstance. And people are looking for a clean-cut justice versus mercy.
If that's the case, then we're saying the same thing. I don't see how we're different in any way then.
Okay, I guess we've met up on the same road now.
If like I said, that's what I've been saying from the beginning, is that I think it's just an importance that both are important. Both have an equal demand on each individual, and that each individual needs to know when and how to execute both. So yeah, I mean, if that's what you're saying, then we've been on the same page for a bit now.
Okay, last thing, I do have to go, so this is going to be the last thing I say. Let's say, you told me about the article about the man who forgave the guy who murdered his son instantaneously. Yeah. Would you also be celebrating the guy who gave perfect mercy 12.5 years later, and just like he got like perfect mercy down? Because we're celebrating the guy who gave instantaneous mercy. Would you also be rejoicing with me if there was like a story or a news article about a guy who delivered mercy 12.5 years after his son was murdered, and he became pen pals with the convict, and then at just the right moment he delivered mercy? Like, could that be as celebrated as the guy who gives instant mercy, because that guy guy's using full discretion there? Could that be celebrated?
Asking you this question, then you've absolutely misunderstood me. Why wouldn't I? Isn't it what, I've heard many stories about people who have gone back to World War II camps and forgiven their Japanese captors, or people who have gone back to Germany and seen. I mean, this happens so often, and it takes years of them trying to get in contact with these people. So it's not about whether it's instantaneous or not instantaneous. Who gives a damn? The question is the good accomplished? The question is has it done the thing that it set out to do? Mm-hmm. Because whether or not it was given, whether or not I don't care who it's given by, I don't care where it's given, why it's given. If it does the good that it's supposed to do, then absolutely I'm all for it. Just like I'm all for it when a criminal goes to jail for what he did. And so it's all about it. It doesn't matter. It's what matters most is has it accomplished the good? And yeah, so I would rejoice with you, absolutely, in a heartbeat.
Okay, I love that. I love that. So when you said forgiving Nazis, I thought of Viktor Frankl, who like instantaneously forgave. Yeah. maybe some people are capable of being forgiven 3 years after their transgression, some 1 month after their transgression, and some people maybe 10 years. It's all about finding that magical moment and then pulling the trigger when need be. Kenny, thank you so much for being on the show today.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me.
This concludes the 163rd episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.